The Silence of the Lambs is known as one of the most shocking films that left a lasting mark on an entire generation of moviegoers. Yet few people know the hidden story behind the best-selling novel, a disturbing and mysterious case that began in Mexico and which, by a twist of fate, brought together two people who were never meant to meet. Let me take you through the story of Doctor Alfredo Balli Trevino, the real Hannibal Lecter. Mexico, 1959. Crossing the border has never been easier. The border guards stared at him for a moment without even bothering to ask for his ID, before waving him through with a casual, "You're good to go." Had it been the other way around, a Mexican trying to enter the United States, it wouldn't have gone so smoothly. They would have asked him for a visa, a precious document not easy to get from the embassy, questioned him about his travel plans, and even asked whether he planned to assassinate the President of the United States, along with other absurd questions. He would have had to answer calmly, keeping his cool, making sure not to look the American border guard in the eye, the tall, blonde, stone-faced man with large sunglasses. Texas was now behind him. The landscape already looked different in this neighboring state, poor and deeply Catholic, where only Spanish was spoken. After passing the checkpoint, he drove for several kilometers, not knowing where he was going or even why. At the time, there were no highways in Mexico. The main roads looked like narrow, rural lanes, filled with potholes and cracks, causing the car to bounce around constantly, quite unlike the wide, freshly paved American roads, with traffic flowing smoothly in both directions. Along the way, he spotted artisans selling handmade goods, mostly indigenous women with brown skin and almond-shaped eyes, their baskets at their feet, a baby clinging to their breast, holding up their wares as each car passed. "Hand-woven rugs, senor. I made them myself. 3 pesos each, 5 pesos for 2. The woman, her weathered face framed by 2 long braids, eyed him hungrily. A gringo, a somewhat derogatory term for Americans, or white people in general, was always rich and ready to buy anything without bargaining, not part of his capitalist culture. But the driver declined, mumbling something in English before speeding off, leaving the woman behind with her 2 rugs spread on the ground. No one knew yet that this blond man with the scarred face in his 40s was on the run, an escaped patient from a psychiatric hospital in Wichita, Texas. His name was Dykes Askew Simmons. What do we know about his past? Not much. People say he worked for years on various construction sites as a crane operator, that he was married and later divorced, and that he had been living alone in a modest house in the suburbs of Waco. Complaints had piled up at his workplace, and his co-workers feared his outbursts and unpredictable fits. Once, while everyone was on a lunch break, he grabbed a box cutter and tried to slit his wrists in front of the other workers. It took 3 strong men to restrain him. In 1958, Dykes was committed to a psychiatric institution for schizophrenia and sociopathic disorders after attempting to kidnap a supermarket cashier. His medical files stated that he posed a danger to himself and to others. Inside the asylum, the days all looked the same. Placed in isolation, as is often the case with aggressive and dangerous patients, Dykes was overwhelmed with tranquilizers and barbiturates. He spent most of his time sleeping, completely unaware of what was happening around him. How did he manage to escape from such a high-security facility? And what gave him the idea to flee to Mexico in a stolen car? No one knows. What is certain is that the feeling of freedom made him giddy. He burst into hysterical laughter as he wandered down the road. Soon a cluster of white houses came into view, surrounded by giant flowering cacti. It looked more like a quiet residential neighborhood. In front of one of these houses, there was quite a commotion, a lot of movement and noise. A red and white banner announced the event. Quinceañera Feliz, Maria Guadalupe. Happy 15th birthday, Maria Guadalupe. Crepe paper flowers, garlands, balloons, and a life-size statue of the Virgin Mary decorated the entrance. A group of mariachis sang romantic ballads, tipping their wide-brimmed hats to greet the crowd gathered in the garden. Dozens of little girls in their finest dresses ran in every direction, weaving between servers carrying trays of food. The quinceañera is a celebration throughout Latin America for a young girl's 15th birthday, a kind of rite of passage into womanhood. Its splendor can rival that of a wedding, and even the poorest families are willing to go into debt to celebrate it properly. In any case, it's an opportunity for mothers, aunts, and friends to gather, for husbands to get drunk, and for children to gorge on sweets and run around freely. Dykes Simmons was visibly shaken by the atmosphere of this foreign and exotic celebration. He watched from a distance, sitting in his car, his chin tucked into the collar of his yellow plaid shirt. He stayed there, frozen, mesmerized by the sight of little girls sitting on swings, being pushed from behind by their sisters or friends, shouting and calling out to one another. Then suddenly a voice on the radio. A man in his 40s has just escaped from the Wichita State Hospital. He is 5'10", blonde, with scars on his face. He is believed to have stolen a Ford vehicle registered in Houston, plate number. If seen, please report immediately to the nearest police station. This individual is considered dangerous and may be armed. The fugitive let out a long sigh, his thoughts blurred by the noise of the party and the voice on the radio. He stepped out of the car and slammed the door shut. Out on the lawn, 4 children, 3 girls and a boy were trying to assemble a colorful kite. "There's no wind, Manuel. It won't fly," said the oldest girl. "I'm telling you, if I run fast enough, I'll make it fly." "You're as stubborn as a mule." "Hola, niños." The 4 children turned around. In front of them stood a tall blond man wearing large aviator sunglasses. He stared at them with a smile, trying to shield his face with a freckled hand. "Hola," they answered in unison. "Are you a guest of Mr. Munoz?" asked the oldest girl. "Yes," lied Dykes Simmons, mumbling in broken Spanish. "He's over there," said the boy Manuel, pointing toward the house where a group of men were toasting happily. "Thank you, kids. But first I have a gift for you." 3 of the 4 children were siblings: Hilda, 12, Marta, 10, and Manuel Perez Villagomez, 9. The 4th was their cousin. She leaned in and whispered something in Hilda's ear. "I'm going to get some cake and lemonade." "Okay, but don't be long." "Mister, would you like a slice of cream cake?" she asked him. "Oh no, thank you. I have, diabetes." Dykes askew. Simmons was starting to grow impatient. "So kids, don't you want to see the gift?" "Oh yes, of course we do," replied Manuel. "Come on then, follow me." Quickly. Gullible, the 3 siblings followed the American fugitive, believing he was the family friend he claimed to be. He hurried them into the stolen Ford, jumped behind the wheel, and sped off. At first, the children were quiet, but it didn't take long before panic began to creep in. "Sir, where's our gift?" Hilda asked timidly. Dykes didn't answer. He had locked the doors to prevent them from escaping. "Your friend didn't want to come. Too bad for her. She won't get her reward," he said, eyeing the children through the rearview mirror. Huddled close together, the kids finally realized something was terribly wrong. It's important to remember this was a time when child abductions were extremely rare, especially in a tight-knit Mexican neighborhood, where everyone knew each other and kids played freely in the streets. They also began to understand that this man wasn't Mexican and didn't speak a word of Spanish aside from the earlier "Hola, niños" and a few clumsy phrases. They watched as he fidgeted nervously, fiddling with the radio dial and chain-smoking Lucky Strikes. "We want to get out, sir. Please let us out," Hilda begged in Spanish. But Dykes Simmons wasn't listening. Growing more agitated, he suddenly screamed, "Shut up, you little brats! I've got a headache, shut up!" They drove on in tense silence for another 50 kilometers. Eventually, the car pulled up to an abandoned hacienda, an old ranch. Dykes Simmons stopped and pulled the keys from the ignition. He ordered the children out of the car and told them to follow him. "If any of you try to run, I'll shoot. I've got a revolver, got it?" His voice alone was enough to paralyze them with fear. He didn't even need to pretend to draw the gun. He herded them forward roughly, unmoved by their pleas and sobs. The white dresses of the two sisters tore on the bushes. They stumbled and cut their legs twice. Dyke Simmons laughed at the sight. Not a soul around. No guard dogs. The whole place was dilapidated and covered in pale, powdery dust. At one point, little Manuel kicked at the kidnapper's legs. Dykes grabbed him by the stiff collar of his shirt, leaned in close, his stare terrifying, and shouted, "Don't try to act tough with me, you little bastard, or I'll kill you right here." He pulled out the revolver, the same one he had been threatening them with, which was, in fact, a fake. But of course, the children had no way of knowing that. He pressed the barrel to Manuel's temple, thrilled by the horrified screams of the two sisters. He even pulled the trigger repeatedly, just for fun. An hour later, the fugitive climbed back into the car, dazed, his shirt and pants stained with blood. Behind him lay the bloodied bodies of the three children murdered. Dykes Simmons' escape ended the very next day at a routine road checkpoint. Mexican authorities had been alerted by U.S. Border Patrol agents. From that point on, events unfolded quickly. In the throes of a psychotic episode, Dykes confessed to murdering three children he had kidnapped from a party in Acapulco. At first, the authorities didn't believe him, panicked and disoriented. But the madman insisted, even giving them the location of the crime, a remote, abandoned hacienda. That same day, police received confirmation. Three siblings, Hilda, Marta, and Manuel Perez Villagomez, had last been seen with an unknown man during their cousin's birthday celebration. The search lasted about 10 days, and it wasn't until the 14th that the children were finally found. The good news, young Marta survived. Wounded and terrified, she had been forced to lie still for over 2 weeks beside the corpses of her siblings in that dreadful forsaken place. Lying in her hospital bed, weak and still in shock, Marta nonetheless managed to identify Dykes Askew Simmons as the man who murdered her brother and sister. Following her statement, the former patient of the Wichita Psychiatric Hospital was brought before the court in Monterey, where he was tried and sentenced to death. He became the first American citizen ever to be sentenced to capital punishment by a Mexican criminal court. But across the border, U.S. authorities did everything in their power to have him extradited, citing extenuating circumstances, particularly his mental health issues and extensive psychological history. His defense attorney went so far as to accuse the Mexican justice system of being primitive and of violating the Human Rights Charter. Regardless, the extradition request was denied, and Dykes remained behind bars in a Mexican prison at the mercy of highly vindictive fellow inmates who beat him relentlessly and threatened to kill him for murdering innocent children. His status as an American, a crazy, perverted gringo, only worsened his situation. By the late 1950s, the crime had caused significant political tension between Mexico and the United States. With Dykes Simmons locked up, one might assume that everything ended there, but not quite. He was only the trigger for what was yet to come. Monterrey, Mexico. A few months later, in the Tallares neighborhood of Monterrey, Doctor Alfredo Balli Trevino's clinic was bustling with people that morning. His assistant had long abandoned the very Anglo concept of scheduled appointments, first, because most clients didn't have a telephone, and second, because most of them didn't respect time slots anyway. Arguments had broken out more than once because of that. Now it was first come, first served, and order had been restored. Although Dr. Alfredo Balli Trevino was a surgeon by training, that didn't stop him from treating every other condition people brought to him. He had, almost by necessity, become a general practitioner. Surgery patients were few and far between. To the poor, often illiterate locals, operations were terrifying and seen as a last resort. In their eyes, anesthesia equaled death. They believed it was impossible to wake up from it. Those who did agree to surgery only did so out of desperation, and only because Dr. Balli told them it was necessary, that there was no other choice. stomach aches, migraines, scoliosis, rheumatism, depression, pneumonia. He treated everything and always had a kind word for each patient. Born in 1931 in Mendez, Tamaulipas, of Italian and Spanish descent, Dr. Balli enjoyed an impeccable reputation. His competence was widely acknowledged, not only in Monterrey but even in Mexico City. At just 28 years old, he was highly respected, known for being close to and deeply attentive to his underprivileged patients, whom he regularly helped by waiving fees and even providing free medication, which they could almost never afford. Locals affectionately called him the Doctor of the Poor. He arrived at his clinic every morning at exactly 9 a.m. Some patients, lacking enough chairs, sat in the stairwell and leapt to their feet as soon as they saw him enter, dark sunglasses on, neatly dressed in a tailored suit and smelling of aftershave. He greeted each of them with a smile and a kind word, leaving them moved and slightly intimidated when he extended his hand first. Then he would ask his assistant about the day's schedule, check the list of names, and go wash his hands thoroughly with perfumed soap, which the nurse would then quickly hide so patients wouldn't use it. After that, Dr. Balli would ask for a cup of coffee, light his first 2 cigarettes of the morning, put on his white coat, and disappear into his office. "Please send in Mrs. Jimenez," he would say to his assistant. And thus began the steady rhythm of patients coming and going, a routine that continued for 2 to 3 hours straight, only interrupted by the lunch break, during which the doctor took the time to attend a tennis lesson before returning at 3 p.m. to resume his consultations. From a personal standpoint, apart from his medical skills, Alfredo Balli Trevino was a refined man, short but energetic and charming, always impeccably groomed, with dark auburn hair and soft brown eyes. There was no doubt that beyond the clinic walls he turned many heads or so. It was whispered by the older women who came to see him and openly referred to him as the perfect son-in-law. In this Catholic community, where people constantly watched one another to uncover secrets and scandals, the doctor's private life remained a complete mystery. No one had ever heard of a Mrs. Balli, nor did anyone know what she might look like. So people let their imaginations fill the gaps. They pictured a sweet, elegant housewife from a good family, much like the doctor himself, a refined woman who attended charity galas and made offerings at Sunday Mass. Some imagined her blonde and athletic, others dark-haired and petite. Some gave her noble Spanish ancestry. Others swore she had strong German roots. In reality, there was no Mrs. Balli. The doctor was a seasoned bachelor, in no hurry to change that status. And slowly, clues began to cast doubt on his supposed heterosexuality. Well-dressed, a bit too perfumed, with delicate, affected mannerisms in a society where raw masculinity was the standard, he began to raise eyebrows. Especially in 1960s Mexico, a deeply patriarchal and religious Latin country, it didn't take long for the whispers to evolve into open speculation about his possible homosexuality. And those rumors weren't just idle gossip. They were absolutely true. For several months now, Dr. Balli had been secretly involved in a romantic relationship with a young medical intern, 8 years his junior, named Jesus Castillo Rangel. 3 times a week, in that very same office, once the day's consultations were over, young Castillo Rangel would come to meet his lover, and it was on the spotless white bench, untainted despite the parade of patients, that the 2 men shared their secret passion. The assistant and the nurse, known for their relentless gossip, saw in the young intern nothing more than a studious student seeking wise counsel from Dr. Balli, who was always generous with his knowledge and time. In fact, the 2 lovers rejoiced in this situation, quietly thrilled at their ability to deceive everyone around them by disguising their romance as nothing more than a mentorship. Even though they lived their love in secret, Alfredo and Jesus were content and happy. Jesus Castillo Rangel, born into a working-class family, dreamed of climbing the social ladder and one day leaving behind the vecindad, the crowded public housing complex he shared with his parents, two brothers, and his grandmother. Though he did love Dr. Balli and enjoyed the benefits of his generosity, he often found the doctor's popularity irritating and his constant willingness to help others downright tiresome. To him, medicine wasn't a calling, it was an escape route, a tool for acquiring wealth and status. He saw himself one day smoking cigars and sipping champagne at charity galas hosted by the elite physicians club. Even though Dr. Balli had sworn eternal love, Jesus was sharp enough to know that he could be replaced overnight, traded in for a boy who was more handsome, more cunning, or simply richer. He had grown accustomed to being taken care of, to receiving money in exchange for his sexual favors, and he wasn't the least bit scandalized by that. In fact, he welcomed it. What terrified him was the idea that it could all come to an abrupt end. One day he asked his lover for a large sum of money. When Dr. Balli asked what it was for, Jesus replied that he wanted to buy a car. The down-to-earth nature of the request offended the doctor. When you have your own practice and have earned the trust of your patients, then you can indulge in these kinds of extravagances. But the stubborn Jesus insisted, saying he felt humiliated by the material wealth of the rich kids on campus, who showed up to class in chauffeur-driven cars while he rode the bus with workers and peasants. Dr. Balli shook his head like a wise old man, trying to talk sense into him, but it was no use. Agitated and upset, Jesus started to whimper and beg his lover to do him this favor. "You don't know what it's like to grow up poor. Of course you don't, but I do. I know what it's like to have just 2 shirts and 2 pairs of pants for the entire year, to never have pocket money to walk past a store window and feel crushed because you can't afford what you want." He insisted so much and played the part so well that he eventually wore down the heart of the doctor of the poor and convinced him to lend him the money. They even agreed on a strict deadline: 3 months, no excuses. Deal done. But as the months went by, Jesus made no move to repay his debt. He was far too pleased with his used car, proudly driving it through the streets of his working-class neighborhood, soaking in the jealousy and admiration that followed him everywhere. Now that he'd gotten what he wanted, he even began spacing out his 3 weekly visits to the doctor. Alfredo Balli, angry but not entirely surprised, began to hound him for the money, accusing him of breaking his word, of being untrustworthy. And from there, the relationship started to unravel. Hurt and cornered, Jesus promised to repay him and asked for just a little more time. When he visited the doctor at his office, he tried to make him forget the whole thing with his sexual prowess, hoping to soften his lover's heart once again. On the evening of October 8, 1959, Jesus Castillo Rangel arrived at Dr. Balli's office. He passed the last patient of the day, an old man who had just had a leg amputated and was struggling to walk with the help of 2 crutches. The nurse, already ready to leave, simply waved goodbye. They were now alone. Jesus knocked on the doctor's door. "It's me," he announced. The 2 men kissed, and Alfredo suggested Jesus wait in the consultation room while he finished typing up an important report. But Jesus got straight to the point. He clearly wanted to settle the matter once and for all. "I brought your money, but I couldn't get the whole amount. You can count it if you want." He looked away as the doctor unfolded the yellow envelope and counted the thin wad of bills inside. It wasn't even half the amount. "Jesus, I told you." "Yeah, well, I don't have your damn money. You think I'm made of gold or something? I had to borrow from friends just to scrape that together. You really can't be trusted, and I was a fool to give you that money so generously. That's always been my problem, pitying people who don't deserve it." "What's that supposed to mean?" "I think you know exactly what I mean." The tone escalated quickly, and within moments, the 2 lovers were in a physical fight. In the heat of the moment, Dr. Balli struck Jesus hard on the head. Jesus collapsed instantly, losing consciousness. A heavy silence fell over the consultation room. The doctor made sure the door was securely shut. that no one had entered the office during the altercation, catching him red-handed. No, the waiting room was empty. The nurse had left long ago. He returned. Jesus lay sprawled out on the floor, eyes closed. The doctor knelt beside him and checked his pulse and heartbeat. He wasn't injured, just stunned by the blow. But instead of reviving him, Doctor, Balli rummaged through his medical cabinet and retrieved some supplies. With mechanical precision, he injected him with sodium pentothal, a sulfur-based barbiturate used in anesthesia, and dragged him toward the bathroom. The boy was strong and heavy, and the small, wiry doctor struggled to pull him by the arms. It took nearly 10 minutes to get him into the bathroom, and it was there in that cold clinical room that the full darkness of Dr. Balli, the doctor of the poor, the guardian angel of Talares, would be revealed. Armed with his scalpel, he first slit his lover's throat, calmly dabbing the spurting blood with towels and cotton pads. Then he moved on to the rest of the body, dismembering it with chilling precision arms, hands, legs, tibias, and more. Dr. Balli finished carving up the corpse into perfect anatomical sections. Once done, he packed the pieces into a box, then stepped into the shower. He stuffed his blood-soaked apron into a plastic bag. He took his time washing thoroughly, changing clothes and dousing himself with cologne. And then suddenly the doorbell rang. He froze, holding his breath, ears straining. Again the bell. Dring! He locked his office door and walked toward the entrance. Yes? Who is it? Doctor, it's me, Asuncion. I forgot my house keys here. Ah, please wait a moment. I lost mine too. He lied. Don't worry, I have the spare set. The key turned in the lock, and the nurse opened the office door, visibly embarrassed. I'm terribly sorry, doctor. I just realized. It's fine. Just make it quick. I have an important meeting. The sharp, metallic smell of blood hung in the air, but in her rush, the nurse didn't notice it. She eventually found her keys and left, still apologizing, practically pushed out by the doctor. He went to the window and waited, watching her walk down the street and disappear, before going downstairs with the bloodied bags. He left the office and placed the cardboard box containing the victim's remains, along with the plastic bag holding his own soiled clothes, into the trunk of his car. He made the mistake of stopping by a neighbor's house to borrow a shovel. It's for my geraniums, I need to repot them, he said with a smile. He took the shovel, tossed it onto the back seat, started the engine, and drove toward Rancho La Noria, located in the municipality of Guadalupe. There, in that desolate, forsaken place, he disposed of the body and the plastic bag. The next day, he returned to work as if nothing had happened, providing care to his patients with his usual diligence. The box containing the dismembered body of Jesus Castillo Rangel was finally discovered by the authorities a week later, after his family reported him missing. As part of the investigation, Dr. Balli, a good friend and mentor of the victim, with whom he shared a cordial relationship, was questioned, along with his staff, by criminal investigator Eusebio Lara, one of the first to suspect the doctor. Yes, the victim did come to the office the day he went missing, and when the nurse returned to collect her house keys, Dr. Balli was alone and about to leave. However, after canvassing the neighborhood, one testimony caught the inspector's attention. That same day, the doctor had borrowed a shovel from a neighbor, claiming it was for his plants, something she found strange and out of the ordinary. From that point on, things escalated quickly. Eventually, the truth emerged, the real nature of the relationship between the victim and his killer, and the reason for the brutal murder, a loaned sum of money. Found guilty, Dr. Alfredo Balli Trevino was sentenced to death in May 1961. The charges brought against him were premeditated homicide, illegal burial, and identity theft for having used Jesus Castillo's student ID to borrow medical textbooks from the university library. Balli faced his trial with remarkable composure, almost proud of what he had done, showing no remorse, no regret whatsoever. On the contrary, he boasted about it, detailing the precision and cold surgical care with which he dismembered Jesus Castillo's body, proudly explaining how he managed to avoid even touching the bones with each incision. Awaiting his execution, he was imprisoned at the Topo Chico Penitentiary in Nuevo León. To the authorities, Balli was likely not a first-time offender. For a time, he was linked to other cases of disappearances and murders committed along Mexico's national highways. But without evidence or witnesses, nothing could be proven, and his guilt in those additional crimes was never established. His conviction, the dark and psychopathic nature of his personality, the horrific nature of the murder, all shocked the country and stirred fear and disgust. The fact that he was homosexual added, in the public eye, a further monstrous dimension to his crime. The Mexican press, always eager for sensational stories, gave him multiple nicknames: the Killer Doctor, the Monster of Talares, Dr. Death, and Vampire Balli. Behind bars, however, the once beloved doctor revealed himself to be a model inmate, calm, educated, and oddly respectable. From the very first days of his incarceration, he offered his medical skills to other prisoners, tending to the sick and wounded, which earned him admiration and a surprising level of respect, almost making people forget why he was there in the first place. By 1963, Alfredo Balli Trevino had been serving his sentence for 3 years. One day he received an unexpected visit from a young American reporter working for a magazine called Argosy. His name was Thomas Harris. Only 23 years old, he had the air of a boyish newcomer with the open, earnest manner so typical of many Americans. Harris was in Mexico investigating a complicated case that dated back 3 years. He had previously obtained permission from a prison director in Monterrey to interview a man named Dykes Askew Simmons, an escaped asylum inmate and the murderer of 2 of the 3 Perez Villagomez children. The young journalist had been deeply affected by Simmons's appearance, his cleft lip, the scars on his face. His time in the Mexican prison had only made things worse mentally and physically. Simmons was on death row. Shortly before meeting Harris, he had attempted to escape. The attempt failed. Prison guards had shot him down, leaving him gravely wounded during his desperate flight. By coincidence or fate, Simmons was treated by none other than Alfredo Balli, who had been highly recommended for his surgical expertise. Balli was even chosen to accompany Harris during the interview with Simmons. After the meeting, the reporter and the former surgeon shared a pleasant conversation, chatting about everything and nothing, like 2 old acquaintances. Harris, curious and open-minded, spoke decent Spanish, while Balli revealed himself to be a charming, eloquent man, gently correcting Harris's pronunciation like a patient teacher. He even admitted regretting not having learned English earlier in life. Even his physical appearance didn't go unnoticed. The journalist would later describe him as a neat, small, agile man with dark red hair and a certain elegance in his posture and gestures. Sitting across from each other in the visiting room, they talked at length about Dykes Simmons' personality, his childhood traumas, his disfigurement and insecurity, the late diagnosed schizophrenia, his refusal to take treatment, the kidnapping and terrible murder of the children, and so on. But after a while, the conversation took a strange and unsettling turn when Dr. Balli Trevino suddenly asked, "Did you happen to have sunglasses with you, Mr. Harris?" "Yes, why?" "What did you feel when you looked at Simmons?" "I'm not exactly sure. Something unsettling." Could you suggest that during your interview, Simmons not wear his sunglasses?" "And why is that?" "Because he might see his own reflection in the—" "But tell me, do you think Simmons was bullied and mistreated by other kids in school because of his scars?" "Probably. Sadly, it's something that happens quite often." Dr. Balli seemed satisfied with that answer. But then he added, "Yes, it does happen quite often." And then, without warning, he changed the subject. Do you have photos of the victims, the three siblings? Do you think they were beautiful children? Yes, they were. They came from a good family, well educated, or so I've been told. But you're not saying they provoked him, are you? No, of course not. But childhood wounds have a way of repeating themselves later in life. An abused child recreates the same pattern as an adult. At that moment, the prison director, Miguel Guadiana-Barra, arrived and abruptly ended the interview, stating that visiting time was over. What visiting time? Thomas Harris, still unaware of the true identity of the man he had just spoken with, invited him to visit him someday in Texas. Dr. Balli replied politely in broken English, "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I surely will when I'm allowed to travel again." The reporter would later recall that there was no trace of irony in the man's voice, and he had actually seemed flattered by the invitation. As Harris left the visiting room, he turned to the prison director and asked, "How long has Dr. Balli been working here as a physician?" Miguel Guadiana-Barra looked at him, wide-eyed and incredulous. "Really? You don't know who he is? That man is a murderer, a dangerous psychopath. He's never leaving this place," he exclaimed. What do you mean, Mr. Barra?" The director then recounted the horrific murder of Jesus Castillo Rangel, the romantic relationship he had shared with Dr. Balli beforehand, and how everything ended in tragedy over a dispute about a car, though Barra doubted that was the only reason. Thomas Harris opened his mouth to respond but found himself speechless. Balli showed no remorse. During the trial, he recounted the entire thing as though he were sharing a pleasant anecdote. The journalist then asked why they allowed Balli to continue practicing medicine inside the prison, treating inmates without fear that he might do something again. The director reassured him. Balli showed genuine compassion for the poor. That, perhaps, was his only human quality. The encounter between Thomas Harris and Alfredo Balli had been brief but deeply disturbing, enough to haunt him for years, and we now understand why. Alfredo Balli Trevino spent 20 years behind bars before his death sentence was commuted by his lawyer. In 1982, at the age of 49, he was released on parole for good behavior. From that point on, he dedicated his life to caring for the poor in Monterrey, treating them for free in a modest clinic, just as he had done before. He died in 2009 at the age of 81. His complex story, the crime, his psychopathic tendencies might have been forgotten forever. But in 1988, journalist Thomas Harris, who had once spoken with him, drew inspiration from that meeting to write a worldwide bestseller, The Silence of the Lambs, adapted into a film 3 years later to massive success. In this chilling psychological thriller, Harris brought to life one of the most enigmatic and terrifying characters in the history of literature and cinema, Dr. Hannibal Lecter, portrayed masterfully by British actor Anthony Hopkins. The American Film Institute would later name Lecter the greatest villain in film history. Thomas Harris would go on to say that the similarities between Hannibal Lecter and Alfredo Balli lay in the elegance, the erudition, the eloquence, and the subtle way of killing with a scalpel. In 2013, on the 25th anniversary of the book's release, Harris tried to find out what had become of the prisoner doctor who had haunted him so deeply. Having forgotten his name, he continued to refer to him as Dr. Salazar. To trace him, he enlisted the help of Mexican investigative journalist Diego Osorno, who conducted research in Monterrey, Acapulco, and Mexico City. Osorno managed to gather information about Dr. Balli Trevino from people who had known him, former inmates, patients, the prison director, but never managed to speak to the man himself, as Balli had already been dead for 5 years. The complexity of that prison conversation between Thomas Harris and Alfredo Balli inspired one of the most iconic and chilling scenes in the film, The Silence of the Lambs, a journey into the mind of a killer.